Welcome back for another reading. We are on the March 9th reading. We're going to be in Judges chapter 6, and we're going to be looking at the story of Gideon, who's one of the judges that gets quite a bit of face time in the book of Judges. So we're going to be in Judges chapter 6. I'm reading from the NIV, and let's dig into the Word of God. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and the other eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza, and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep nor cattle nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count them or their camels. They invaded the land to ravage it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. When the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians, and I delivered you from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live. But you have not listened to me." The angel of the Lord came down and sat underneath the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash, the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." "Pardon me, my lord," Gideon replied. "But if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us over into the hand of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" "Pardon me, my lord," Gideon replied, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." The Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive." Gideon replied, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me. Please do not go away until I come back and bring my offering and set it before you." And the Lord said, "I will wait until you return." Gideon went inside, prepared a young goat, and from an ephah of flour he made bread without yeast. Putting the meat in a basket and its broth in a pot, he brought them out and offered them to him under the oak. The angel of God said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened bread, place them on this rock, and pour out the broth." And Gideon did so. Then the angel of the Lord touched the meat and the unleavened bread with the tip of the staff that was in his hand. Fire flared from the rock, consuming the meat and the bread, and the angel of the Lord disappeared. When Gideon realized that it was an angel of the Lord, he exclaimed, "Alas, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." But the Lord said to him, "Peace, do not be afraid, you are not going to die." So Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and called it, "The Lord is Peace." To this day it stands in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. That same night the Lord said to him, "Take the second bull from your father's herd, the one 7 years old. Tear down your father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. Then build a proper kind of altar to the Lord your God on top of this height. Using the wood of the Asherah pole that you cut down, offer the second bull as a burnt offering." So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord told him. But because he was afraid of his family and the townspeople, he did it at night rather than in the daytime. In the morning, when the people of the town got up, there was Baal's altar demolished, an Asherah pole beside it cut down, and the second bull sacrificed on the newly built altar. They asked each other, "Who did this?" When they carefully investigated, they were told, "Gideon, son of Joash, did it." The people of the town demanded of Joash, "Bring out your son He must die because he has broken down Baal's altar and cut the Asherah pole beside it." But Joash replied to the hostile crowd around him, "Are you going to plead Baal's cause? Are you trying to save him? Who fights for him? Whoever fights for him shall be put to death by morning. If Baal is really a god, he can defend himself when someone breaks down his altar." So because Gideon broke down Baal's altar, they gave him the name Jerubbaal that day, saying, "Let Baal contend with him." Now all the Midianites and Amalekites and other eastern people joined together and crossed over the Jordan and camped in the valley of Jezreel. Then the Spirit of the Lord came on Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, summoning the Abiezrites to follow him. He sent messengers throughout Manasseh, calling them to arms, and also into Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, so that they too went up to meet with them. Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand." And that's what happened. Gideon rose early the next day, and he squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew, a bowl full of water. Then Gideon said to God, "Do not be angry with me. Let me make just one more request. Allow me one more test with the fleece, but this time make the fleece dry and the ground covered by dew." That night God did so. Only the fleece was dry, and all the ground was covered with dew. Okay, so here in Judges chapter 6, we encounter Gideon. Gideon is being called by God to deliver Israel from the Midianites. But we see, like we talked about the other day in the book of Judges, God is not endorsing all of the acts of the judges or the people that he's calling, right? So this Gideon, we can see, one, his family is serving the Baals and the Asherah, and they're worshiping at an Asherah pole, right? God tells Gideon, "Cut down your father's Baals, cut down the Asherah pole, offer a sacrifice to me on it." We also see Gideon operates actually as a kind of a coward. He's like, who am I that you would call me? He says, I'm the least of my tribe. My tribe is the least of the tribes of Manasseh. How are you going to use me to be a mighty warrior? Even though the angel of the Lord shows up and says, "Gideon, mighty warrior of the Lord," right? Gideon operates as a coward and it really backs away from it. And then we see him continue to operate as a coward. When God tells him, "Cut down the Baal and cut down the Asherah pole and offer a sacrifice to me," he sneaks out at night to avoid people being mad at him, to avoid being caught, and does it in the middle of the night when no one's watching, when no one's there to see it or bear witness to it. And, probably part of what God wanted to have happen was to have this mighty warrior stand up and this mighty warrior, as God has called him, stand up and say, "Enough is enough. We're not going to worship these Baals. We are God's people. We're going to serve him. We made a covenant with him in the wilderness, and he protected us from in Egypt and in the wilderness and delivered us this promised land. And we're not going to take this from the Midianites anymore, and we're not going to serve these false gods and tear down the idol and tear down the Asherah pole and offer a sacrifice to God in front of all the people." But that's not what Gideon does. He sneaks up in the night, cuts it down quietly, cuts down the Asherah pole quietly, tears down the Baal quietly, and then offers the sacrifice to the Lord. So he obeys, but he obeys in as minimalistic way as possible, right? And then the townspeople are coming after him, and his dad has to stand up for him. Gideon doesn't come out and say, "I did this because of God, and because God told me to, and because we're honoring our ancestors, and we're going to stick to what God has called us to, and we're going to be faithful to the covenant-keeping God." No, Gideon allows his dad, Joash, to come out and fight his battle for him. And Joash is like, "Baal could defend himself. If Baal was such a powerful God, why does Baal need you to come and defend him?" Right? And so the people kind of leave Gideon alone at that point. And then God says, "Okay, gather up these men and go and fight the Midianites. Go fight them. I'm gonna deliver them into your hands." And Gideon continues to operate in fear as a coward. He's like, "You know what, God? If that's really you, if you're really saying that to me, then let this basically washcloth, let this thing that I lay out, let it get soaking wet in the middle of the night by the dew, but let the ground be dry." And God appeases and says, "Okay." And he soaks the fleece, soaks this kind of towel, this washcloth thing, and lets the ground be dry. And Gideon's like, "Maybe that just happened by chance. Maybe that's not actually God. God, if that's really you, this time let the fleece be dry and let the ground be wet." And the next morning he comes out and finds it just as he said, right? And so We see this picture of a person who's operating in cowardice. We see a picture of a person who's operating with a lack of faith and trust. Yet there's enough evidence there that God has pushed him to the point where he's going to at least do what God has called him to do. Even if he does it quietly, even if he does it in a hidden way, even if he does it in fear and trepidation, he's at least doing it. And so this judge that God is raising up, Gideon, this mighty warrior, as God, as the angel of the Lord calls him, right, is being sent forth to deliver Israel from the oppression of the Midianites. And we're going to pick up tomorrow in chapter 7 and find out how God goes about that. I would encourage you, Wellspring, if you are a person who battles with trusting God, with obeying Him, with doing the things He's calling you to, if you wrestle with that tendency to want to be afraid or to feel lack of hope or even feel a little bit cowardice towards doing the things that God has called you to, if you feel like I'm not brave enough to step out, ask the Lord to meet you, ask Him to walk with you. In the same way that Peter stepped out of the boat and out onto the water, he had to be brave, he had to trust the Lord. God is calling us to do that as well, Wellspring. God is calling you and I to say, I will get out of the boat. I will operate in faith. I'm going to trust you. And if you don't have enough bravery, if you don't have enough trust and hope to do that, ask the Lord to give it to you. He will give it to you. He wants to come alongside of you and help you walk in the journey. God will let you walk on the water if you just trust Him, press in, and allow Him to lead you and guide you. God bless you, Wellspring. Have a great day.